Hey everyone, and welcome to the behind the scenes / making of / commentary for Animation Life, the Minecraft animation of Black Magic Studios. My name's Arbor617, the animator for Animation Life. In this video, I'll be kind of talking about the making of it, some of my ideas for it. I'll be going into the scenes, and we'll be looking at actual technical how it was made, and I'll also be kind of showing some of the little Easter eggs and goofs that you might not have known about. So Animation Life was another one of the non-minigame animations I wanted to do. I was thinking it'd be cool to kind of go into the computer itself and kind of explore an animation inside an animation. So here is the first scene of him, of course, waking up. And I wanted it to look, like the default scene you'd see in a 3D program. So if I open up the scene here and we take a look at it, we can see, I even left in the default cube. So it really looks like a, like a default scene. What's interesting though is I needed all this, the grid and the cube and stuff all to render when you render it. So I actually created, my own grid using this little, wireframe. There's a wireframe modifier that makes these little, thin lines. And I just, and even created like the little red and green axes. But I also created a model of the camera. It's not the real camera. There's like, there's the camera, and then there's the fake camera, which I modeled. That way we can really make it look, like the scene. Another thing I did was I wanted all the scenes inside the computer to look a little different than the ones in the real world. So I added this effect called lens distortion. And basically what that does, if I increase the dispersion on it, you can start seeing it creates, I'll kind of overdo it for a second to kind of show what it does. It creates this weird kind of like rainbow effect around the edges. Obviously I didn't have it that much. But you'll notice all these scenes inside the computer, where Steve was in the animation itself, kind of had that effect around the edge, whereas all the scenes in the real world didn't have that. Just one way of kind of separating the two worlds. Then we have a little transitory shot where it shows this city and it kind of pans down. We have a custom little texture I created for making a little Black Plasma Studios. So it's actually the real Black Plasma Studios for once. It's actually the studio building. I think there's a few Easter eggs here. There's one. The license plate says Ye. Also, if you're paying attention and you look down the road, you'll notice the old man walks out in the road and he's about to get hit by the car right before the camera cuts. And that was kind of a joke because in Don't Touch, he left dirt kind of under the anvil, and it's kind of like he goes between being a villain and a hero. He's kind of that wild card character. You don't know if he's going to help or hurt. But after Don't Touch, I thought, he was kind of evil. Let's get some little punishment, so I throw him getting kind of ran over by a car, but you don't actually see it. Then we get to the office scene, which is probably one of the most interesting sets I've ever had to create for Minecraft animation, because I really wanted to make it, feel like, a little bit more of a real set, even though, it's still Minecraft animation. This is supposed to feel like real life, whereas the animation Steve's in is supposed to be more like an animation. So we tried to create a lot of custom props. Myself and Tiger Stripe created a lot of different things. Tiger Stripe helped with things like the laptops, the keyboards, the computer. I did things like some power outlets. I also created these little YouTube play buttons, just like here's the 100,000 one, and here's the million one, which is funny because this is supposed to be like in the future when we potentially have 1 million subscribers. I also grabbed some little props. Ninja Charlie released these 3D models that are made to be like 3D printed for the Warlords characters. I love Warlords, so I thought it'd be cool to put them up there as like little statues. There's even little like movies. Some of them are also little jokes, but I don't think you ever really could even see these going around the room. We've also got like posters of that was my previous largest Halo machine I ever made, Rise of the Spartans. So I had a poster for that. We got little, glowing potions, tools. I made a clock, which is also square. We got a piano. And we got some little things. There's little like accessories that just kind of move around. So there's the office scene, and we have, my character comes out and he looks on the computer and he sees, the Steve has actually awoken inside the animation itself. And that was kind of the idea for the animation was, okay, the Steve wakes up in the animation, but he's alive, and then it would be about the animators kind of creating the animation while one of the, rigs is actually alive. So they're kind of manipulating it in real time as the, Steve is moving around. And then for this scene, it was as simple as just, I had these, the grass and the blocks all as, one big world as usual. So I was able to just kind of keyframe them, flying down and into place, so it looks like he's kind of appending them into the scene or importing them or whatever. And then I keyframed the sky to turn on. And then this shot was one that was very interesting. because I was really kind of debating different ways I could do this effect. I wanted kind of the materials to turn on, but I didn't want them just to simply, pop in. It just seemed a little boring to me. I wanted to give it a little bit more of a flavor to it. So I wanted it to kind of come in as like a wave. But I'm like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to map every single texture to wave across the whole thing? There's all kinds of ways I could do that with, mapping a color ramp or something that controls what material it chooses. However, the trick I ended up doing is I have this big, huge white plane that moves across the scene, and the plane has a material on it. If we look in the materials, the plane is completely transparent, as in you can't see it. It's literally invisible. And what's good about that is what I can then do, as you'll see, it comes all the way up, comes right up to the camera, and then it stops, right in front of the camera, so it covers the whole camera view, and then it stays in front of the camera. So what I was able to do is I go to all these materials, and I was able to say, okay, if the material is looking through a transparent object, it's going to use, the material color, whereas if it's not, it's just going to use a solid green color, or in the case of the dirt, solid brown. So I just can't set it up for the different things. But I thought it made a pretty good, simple way of getting that effect without having to do too much weird material work. So then Steve finally jumps down. I start getting rid of things like the grid, the cube, starts clearing everything up. And then we start getting, some of the other animators start waking up and find that I'm doing something cool. Sam comes in, he's drinking his tea. He's like, oh cool, what's going on? He sips it. We also had a Tiger remake the mug to have the BPS logo on it, which is pretty cool. So then Steve continues to kind of walk around. Everything's being imported, the world's being populated. So then he, spawns in a bone. He's like, huh, why is there a bone? He picks it up. And of course then he spawns in a little wolf, which is going to be his little wolf companion. Then I wanted to make him look a little cute, so I have a little, tail waggle. His tail has nice little kind of jiggly and bendiness. I added an extra little thing for the face, because by default it didn't have this this thing to make his eyes look a little more cute. You kind of pull him up, make him look a little happier. So I added that in custom to make him look a little cuter. And then similar to my dog, I have a dog as well, Jack Russell Terrier. And here finally we get the first little bit of something's not quite right. So we see, this is the viewport camera. This is, me looking at the wolf as it's running off. But there's another camera that comes up. And the idea for this is that, of course, by the end of the animation you realize it was Herobrine. He is kind of like, whereas Steve woke up in the software as, kind of a happy, friendly character, Herobrine also woke up in the software, somewhere else. And he's kind of, the villain doing the same thing. However, Herobrine is more of like a virus, and he's even, messing with the software itself. He's even able to, look around in the scene. He's able to, bring things in and mess with the environment. Later on, in the final scene where he's fighting, you can see Herobrine even like picks up cubes, kind of using the force sort of stuff. That's supposed to be him kind of manipulating it. I just didn't feel like putting little arrows in anymore at that point. And then we get the kind of dramatic mood shift here. The lightning strikes. And then, okay, again, you can't see it, but the sky changes colors here. It's just one of those things that just doesn't update. Actually, the reason it doesn't update is because I'm in the wrong scene. Okay, well actually it still doesn't update in this scene. However, at least this scene has the lightning strike. And one thing you may have noticed if you're looking very closely was right as the lightning strikes, every time it flashes, you could see Herobrine standing on the mountain. It's a very subtle little thing, but here in the scene I can pause it to actually prove it. He would appear as every time it strikes. And the lightning was the same lightning I used for Mystery Warfare. It's these little vertices, you can just move them around. And I used the skin modifier. And I also had a little displacement, I think. That way I could kind of randomize it just a little bit. That way each lightning strike wasn't exactly the same. As you see this one, it's kind of like goes down here and here. Whereas the next one's a little bit more up. And then the wolf starts getting a little worried, puts his tail down. And this is where like the pretty big mood shift happened that I wanted to happen pretty early on. I was kind of worried it might have taken a little bit too long before we got to this mood shift. Everything was all kind of happy and la-di-da for a little while. But hopefully people still enjoyed the beginning and got to this point, because this is where, some of the action kicks in. Because now, Herobrine is supposed to be kind of spawning in, whereas, RB was spawning in, wolves and cows and stuff. Now Herobrine's spawning in zombies to fight him and stuff. He's trying to get him killed, so he spawns in some zombies. Which was also a good chance just to kind of play around with some action. I didn't want to jump straight to null. I wanted to start out just showing some, fighting generic little mobs and stuff. So we get some zombies. And also I actually used all the old zombie fight loops and death loops from Blocking Dead, which made it easy. And then you'll notice Sam's like, oh, you know, I'll help out. So he's gonna pen something. He's gonna bring in a weapon. He goes past all these, you know, important weapons and stuff, and he just spawns in a teacup. And he's all proud about it and kind of sips his tea. Meanwhile, Arby's like, okay, now let's get him some real stuff. So he brings in the shotgun. And again, the shotgun's from Blocking Dead. And again, I try to show, like, okay, the viewport's here. The viewport's helping him. Again, this is a modeled little, you know, triangles, just little cones on little poles. And then again, you know, here's really, I'm kind of going for the whole animators manipulating the scene. I even got, again, the little selection thing, like, it's selected, and then once the thing disappears, it's like unselected and blocks the arrow. So I'll kind of skim through for a little bit. At this point, it's just kind of general fighting stuff, little bits of everything I've shown before. And the wolf fights, he's jumping around. The dragon was pretty interesting. This was actually one of my favorite shots from the whole animation. This really cool shot of him kind of in the distance, in the mist. And then he like lands, shakes the ground. Really cool zoomed in shot. Kind of prepares like he's inhaling. And then he, you know, does this really cool roar. And again, this is what I'm talking about with the camera shots. They're really, to me, a lot more interesting than some of my previous camera shots. It's tilting up a little bit, the dragon's here, and then it lands, so it kind of goes down, and there's like the shake. Then it goes up again as it roars, and it goes back down, and more shaking. So I really wanted to get that kind of just very fluid, you know, following of the dragon. I thought it turned out really well. Another thing interesting was initially there weren't any teeth, but let me say, I did the shot without the teeth, you know, how the dragon normally is, but it just seemed really not intimidating, I guess. The mouth is just kind of like a little, it's like a little paddle. It seemed, it's just like a little block of wood. Didn't really seem scary. So having those little modeled teeth just kind of broke up the silhouette of the mouth a little bit better, and you could see like the little sharp parts. Looked a little weird, but I thought it looked a lot better than not having any. So he's roaring and scaring the wolf. However, you know, this wolf was kind of based off my dog, as mentioned earlier, and she's kind of the dog who, you know, a giant dog will run over and bark at her, and she'll just go over and bark right back, even though she's like a fifth of the size. She's a pretty small dog. But then I wanted to, you know, I was thinking of different ways the animators can be manipulating the scene, so I thought it'd be cool if, oh, you know, maybe they can, you know, scale things. So he scales the wolf up, and again, you know, have a little selection thing, a little scale tool, and then they have their cool fight, which was very difficult. This was a difficult shot to do because there's stuff going on in the foreground. There's a dragon fighting the wolf in the background, giant ones. There's a lot of cool kind of distance effect here. You know, they're kind of back in the mist and a little bit more blurred out, whereas the, you know, Steve fighting the zombies in the front, doing flips and sliding around killing zombies. One of the difficult things about this wolf scene was there were 4 legs on the wolf. So having this wolf spin around, that took a good like hour to get all those little footsteps. I tried to keep all the feet as stationary as possible as it, you know, spun around. And as you can see, you know, that was a lot of working those little feet to do that. And I also tried to make the dragon look like, you know, when he got bit, you know, he closes his eyes and he opens his mouth like in pain, like, and I also had to make the dragon look like he's being, you know, carried by the neck, swung around and thrown to the ground, which was really cool and looked pretty awesome. Then he gets thrown down and like, kind of roars back. So that pretty much finishes up the zombie fight. Wolf, you know, kills the dragon, and his eyes even fade out as if the ender dragon is, you know, dead. So now we're moving into like the real serious stuff. Steve goes to the river and he kind of senses Herobrine. He even sees Herobrine in the reflection. That's when like the little virus pops up. And then I also wanted the wolf to get shrunk back down, because if he was still huge, it would have made this kind of fight with Null kind of difficult. So it's supposed to be now, you know, Arbiter and the animators are kind of locked out of Blender. When the virus is here, they can't manipulate anything anymore. So I wanted it to now be like the wolf is kind of, you know, weakened again. So it's just a fight between Steve and Null. Pulls back out his shotgun. And enter Null, who was very interesting to do. You know, from a in viewport stance, he's just, you know, a solid black with the little white eyes, which is how Null's supposed to be. He's just like an emptiness. But I wanted him to have, you know, smoke fumes. And the smoke fumes were interesting. I went through about 4 or 5 different smoke effects before I finally found one that worked. Took a very long time to get something that worked. In fact, there's actually 2 different smoke effects for Null. If you look at the scene in the woods, when he's kind of sneaking through the woods, that was a completely different setup for the smoke as the one when he fought in the grass. That was the one I actually had done first, but the render times were really slow, and it had a problem with the grass, so there was no way I was going to be able to actually do it for the fight scene when I went to I actually rendered the fight scene second. So then when I went to do the fight scene, I had to invent a new one, and what I did, which if I click on here, they're all hidden in the viewport, but his arms, his back side of his head, and his chest are all emitting particles, as you'd expect. And the advantage to particle system over actual smoke is a lot of things. First of all, the volumetric stuff in Blender is not very well supported yet. It doesn't handle things like mist, or a lot of light stuff shining on it. So I just did a bunch of these particles, and each one of these particles, if I kind of look at one, it's just like it's very hard to see, but it's just this little black kind of smudge that kind of fades out from the inside to the outside. Doesn't really show it too well here, but when you put a whole bunch of them over each other, it kind of creates this kind of dark field of stuff that kind of goes around him, which was cool. Very cool character. I also thought, you know, for his weapon, if he's solid black and white, why not make his sword also like glowing white energy, as with like, you know, the black blade, which seemed really cool. Overall, this Null character was really interesting. He was a little bit of a pain to render, but he was worth it. He was a cool villain. This fight scene was interesting. Try to make a very fast pace. He's, you know, flying around. Let me actually hide these particle emitters. And the other thing that was really interesting about this fight was the sound design. Was something I wanted, you know, as soon as I saw this cool sword I made, I was like, okay, this thing has to sound cool. So I took these whoosh sound effects, like something that flies by like a whoosh, and then I put all sorts of effects on them. First I put like a little bit of a reverb, then I put a chorus so it kind of sounds a little bit more like electronic. I put some distortion, then I equalized it so there's this big kind of bassy woo, woo kind of noise, and then I took out some of the higher frequencies. And then I also sped up it was actually, I think it was a Doppler sound. It was the sound of something passing by, like a that was like the sound, but I'd scale it up in time, so it was like a and then I'd, you know, pitch it and do the chorus. It was like a and it kind of sounded, I didn't want to just make a, you know, a lightsaber 2.0. I wanted to kind of have more of a kind of attacking sound, but also kind of a little more electronic. And I thought that, I feel like that sound plus Null's smoke just made him a really interesting villain when he's fighting. And then a few things that might not have even noticed. Steve actually shoots a few times here. He shoots once here, but, you know, he misses. And then he kind of rolls out of the way. That roll was kind of weird, but it happened so fast you can't really tell. And then right here, he tries to shoot again, but as he's blocking, he shoots down there, misses. And here I wanted him to, you know, really show the power of Null. He turns around and tries to block the sword. Sword cuts right through that shotgun like it's not even a problem. Cuts it in half, which was cool. I had to model like the shotgun in half, and I put this little kind of burnt material on the inside, so it's like it literally got cut in half, and it looks like, oh my gosh. So he grabs the sword and runs across the river. And a funny little thing is, you'll notice none of this gravel was here earlier when he threw the sword into the zombie. I realized he had to get across the river, and I was like, it's gonna be weird if he tries to like swim through the water, or if he tried to run through shallow water, so I ended up just putting gravel in and hoping no one would notice. So now we're to the forest scene, and there's not much really to talk about here that hasn't really been explained before, all other than like this was the different version of the Null particles I used. I tried spheres with this one that would just kind of had a constant effect on them, which looked really cool in the viewport. It was like a big marshmallow man, and they kind of bubble and get bigger and smaller. It looked really cool. However, the render time was really long because of, I guess, the higher poly count and all the spheres, as well as something I tried doing that just didn't really work. And then the wolf, you know, just kind of sacrifices himself to kind of surprise Null. So Null turns around, then Steve stabs him, and then you find, oh no, the wolf got killed as well by Null. And this was one of the things near the very beginning. I was deciding, okay, you know, he's gonna have this little companion to kind of go on an adventure, and I was like, you know, he could die here in this scene, or he could kind of survive. It would be sad if he died. However, I felt like that would be the more appropriate route to go, even though it's sad. Having emotions in your stories, I feel like, is really important. If you have an emotionless story, you know, it's kind of boring. It's like, okay, it's cool and all, but you don't really feel anything. And I thought, even though it's going to be sad, sometimes sad is good. Sad makes the viewer sad as well. Sad makes the viewer, want to get revenge on Noel, or in this case, kind of Herobrine, who's, the cause of all this. And it gives Steve a reason to, kind of get sad later and go on this adventure, trying to find and defeat Herobrine. So I thought it'd be good to kill the wolf. And I knew at the time, of course, that he would be, saved at the end by the autosave. However, I wanted to make sure the viewer didn't really suspect that, and poor wolf, sad scene of the wolf who's dead. And it was right around this point where we just got the Pro Lighting Skies add-on, which gives us all sorts of new environment textures and sky textures and stuff. And there's all sorts of crazy stuff to choose from. There's some really pretty sunset ones. So for the funeral, I got the advantage of being able to use these new Pro Lighting Skies. It was very pretty, probably I'd say one of the most prettiest scenes we've had before. If you look back at original Book of Enchantment, the post-credits scene had a very similar scene with Nitrox kind of standing over his fallen comrade. However, the difference of the new sky really just makes the whole scene. You can see how far we've come with lighting and skies and compositing and stuff. So Steve's sad, has a little moment of, being sad with the wolf having just fallen. And Animation Life was kind of designed as like a 3-act movie. It didn't seem right to cut it into 3 parts. Each part would just been kind of very short. I felt it made more sense as one big whole. You kind of had to watch it all as one big movie. And I'm glad I did it that way. It took a long time to do it as one big movie, but it still had that kind of 3-act thing. So this is kind of where Act 1 ends. Now Act 2 is all about, recruiting the other animators, helping Steve on this adventure to track down Herobrine. So the first, he makes a phone call, and it's not revealed to who at this point, just kind of calling someone and cuts to a beach. And, I put a bunch of little patrons in the beach just to kind of give them little scenes here and there, even though they're just kind of standing around. And here is, of course, Slamacow, one of the most popular Minecraft animators, and one of the ones who, pretty much, I'd honestly say, one of the only animators I ever really watched all of his stuff. There's not really any other, there's not too many Minecraft animators that I really got into. He was pretty much the biggest one for me, and I'd say the biggest one for most people. So the idea is he's calling, the other animators, starting with Slamacow, to bring him in and have him help. And the little joke was, Slamacow's been kind of busy lately. He hasn't been uploading animations like he used to. So we're joking that, he's been hanging out on the beach, just enjoying a vacation, sipping martinis. And he's got a phone here, and I didn't want to reveal it yet, who it is. You can see his little arm. If you recognize Slamacow, you'll probably recognize him right away. However, some other little things I did is the ringtone on his phone is Slamacow's outro song that appears at the ends of his videos. So, the astute observer will have noticed that was Slamacow right away. He reaches down, picks it up, and again, it doesn't quite reveal, and then ta-da, it's Slamacow. Just pretty weird having him in our animations. I usually try to work in animators that I enjoy, even back to like the original Sky Wars animation I did, to put in like Ninja Charlie, Abraham animations, people who I'd been watching at the time. So here we get kind of the big montage scene. There's a bunch of different scenes here. I'm not going to be able to open up every single scene, simply because there's a whole bunch here, and there's not really too many crazy effects at this part. I can kind of just talk about them while I'm looking at them. The only thing that is kind of interesting is one of the Easter eggs that didn't actually work out was this plane scene when the plane's taking off. You really can't see it in the animation unless you pause and look very closely, and even then you can't tell what it is. But if you want to know what the Easter egg was, is I put a zombie hanging on the wing of the plane, similar to Blocking Dead, kind of as a joke, as if maybe this plane, is gonna go off and have another Blocking Dead happen to it. Just kind of sitting there. Initially I had the zombie on like the wing tip, kind of where he was in Blocking Dead. I had him like way down here. However, it was way too obvious that it was like the zombie. This is this big green blob on the sky background, so I had to put him kind of over here. Unfortunately, he became almost impossible to see, and even if you're looking for him, you really can't make him out. So then we start getting this cool kind of cutting shot of all the different animators walking around. We have Blue Monkey, Ninja Charlie, Element Animations, and Freddy Sol. Tiger Stripe spent a long time creating all these different laptops, one for each one of them. We thought, okay, if they're all going to show up here and help out, it'd be cool if they each brought their own laptop. That way it's like they're working independently, and then we can also kind of decorate their laptop with like their logos or their wallpapers or something. That way the viewer will be like, oh, it's that person or something, a little more easily identify who's who. So we get each character helping in their own way. First we get Slamikow. We show that they're spawning. This was kind of, when we see Slamikow spawn in, it was supposed to be more symbolic of Slamikow is helping him. I'm not sure if he was actually in the scene itself. He was just, helping him out. He's, directing him. First they look at a map. Then Element Animation spawns in, his little villager helicopter from Villager News, which was one of the funniest scenes in my opinion when I was watching Villager News a while ago. I remember when there's the helicopter, just laughing through that whole scene. And the way I did that effect is it's actually just in reverse. I built a helicopter out of villagers as like little objects. Then I just made them like burst out and then they fall down to the ground. And I just reversed it, so it's like they're building the helicopter. And then each person's kind of helping in their own way. We get Ninja Charlie kind of helping with like fighting off zombies. A lot of Ninja's animations have a lot of fighting in it, so he's kind of fighting. Blue Monkey, being a monkey, is helping him traverse through the jungle, swinging on vines. And again, even these little shots that are only like 1 second long, each one of these took a while to set up. And even these shots took a lot of new things I've never done before, like the vines. I had to find a way to make them kind of bend and swing. The characters hang on them. And even do like the water shading and the mist and compositing. So you can see why this animation took so long. Like a whole bunch of work went into just this 1 second shot pretty much. Then of course Fred, and I was kind of scraping around for different ideas for places. Sometimes I actually got lazy. Well, okay, a lot of times I got lazy in this montage scene. A lot of these montage shots, a lot of these montage shots are actually from our previous animations. For example, let's go back a little bit. Him standing on this big cliff. That was the same cliff in Jerry the Slime when he was kind of climbing up the cliff. And then this, the villagers going up. That was the same location in Elytra. This desert was a scene from Don't Touch where he was on the mine track and just kind of changed the lighting. The snow scene was almost the exact same snow scene from Jerry the Slime. And then this was actually the funeral scene. I just changed the light a little bit, changed the sky. This was the exact same. This is the same place they began, but the idea was, everyone's helping out. All these different animators showed up, and suddenly, oh, what's this? Then fish just start spawning everywhere, slapping him. I made this funny, huge sound effect, literally of just a bunch of slaps I put together. That's so I could just have this huge slapping sound. And then we see Derp's trying to help out, be just, being derpy. Whereas everyone else was just, typing on the keyboard. He's just slamming the keyboard. I have a bunch of little, even the keyboard itself is bouncing off the ground, like it's really intense. The camera's shaking. He's all happy. He's enjoying it. Harvey's like, oh gosh, what are you doing? No, you're killing me. Pushes him aside and tries to stop it. He gets all sad, like, huh? One thing I wanted to get right before the end, I wanted to get some cool shot of all the animators, minus Derp, all kind of getting ready. And, they're all kind of posing. That way we can use this as a cool like wallpaper or screenshot kind of down the line of all the animators sticking together. Which also reminded me, one of the things I did in the office earlier, kind of skimmed over some of the office stuff, is when they're all working, I finally got to include pizza. Pizza's, a big thing about me. However, it hasn't really been in any of our actual animations yet. And as you'll see, there is a pizza box on the table with a bunch of pizza. Pug sit next to Thomas. And I also used the Gungeoneer's Pizza, which was a reference to one of our old Halo Mishimos, Rise of the Spartans. There was a pizza delivery service called Gungeoneer's Pizza. And then a moment later, I have, me eating pizza. Because this is the first, I wanted to get a shot of me eating pizza in a BPS animation. We've only seen it in that little joke one I did at the beginning of the year. Also, related to this, if you look at Nitrox, he's doing the same gesture he did in Build Battle, where he's talking about how he wants to build a bridge. He's like, yeah, it's going to be a huge bridge. It's going to be great. Like he's going to maybe help build a bridge for Steve. But that kind of wraps up the Act 2. Act 2 was just kind of the animators helping Steve out. And this is what I mean by, like, they weren't really supposed to all be there with him. They might have kind of popped in one at a time to help him, but they were mostly just, manipulating the scene again to help Steve find Herobrine in the system. So moving on to the third act now, we get the cool lava cave kind of place, and this is where he finally confronts Herobrine. I had the visual look for the cave in my head for a very long time when I was planning this, so when it came time to create it, it was pretty much all set. I wanted these kind of big lava fissures around the edge that are all kind of moving around and glowing and pulsing. I created this in the Songs of War world so I might be able to reuse this for Songs of War later. I'll probably change it up a little bit. It won't be in the series itself, but it'll be in the world if people want to eventually explore this place in the Songs of War world. In fact, if you're a Redstone patron, I believe, you're able to check out the Songs of War world. If you ever want to actually look at this set, I can actually take you there now. It's actually all there. But anyway, I created this big sphere, and then I used Voxel Sniper to kind of cut away little cracks, and right outside the sphere was a bunch of glowstone. And I took the glowstone, and I gave it a custom material. If you want to look at it, that's what it looks like. I'll kind of go through it. I used the little magic texture again. Magic texture has some just kind of, it just makes it all red, and it's moving around, being mapped, as well as the multiply value is on like a pulse thing, so it goes from 2, goes up to 5, goes back down to 1, goes back up to 5, so it's kind of glowing, woo, woo, kind of, you know, like that, as well as that is moving the texture around. So not only is it glowing and pulsing, but it's kind of slowly moving, and made it for a very cool effect. Initially, I wanted the cave to be very, very dark, and just like the cube to be illuminated. However, when I went to play around with the compositing, I found that having a lot of mist and kind of heat really made the place feel kind of more interesting, even though it wasn't what I initially envisioned. So here we're looking at a rendered shot, and if you want to kind of dissect it a little bit, if I go into compositing, a lot of compositing again, it's actually kind of the usual stuff. Again, we got the lens distortion, which you can see here, like on the gold, it's a little bit kind of rainbowy. But if we take off the mist, you know, this was kind of my initial idea for it, just being a very dark cave, and just like little spotlights shining on the bridge, and it worked. You know, it made the bridge stand out, and the back feel kind of dark and mysterious. The problem was, I found it was just too hard to see Steve. He would just kind of blend in the background. It also just felt kind of bleh. Whereas if I brought this way up, I think I just brought it way too much up, but we'll just kind of get it for an effect. If I brought this way up, it really kind of made this cool, like he would actually stand out as a silhouette. It also just felt very, very hot. I wanted the room to feel very warm, like he's in like the heart of something or other. And it also, if you turn it way up, it gets really cool looking actually. Let's turn it up to like 5. It was really overboard. But even like the bridge down here like fades into the heat, and it just looks really cool. Also, I did some little minor touch-ups similar to Don't Touch. In Don't Touch, I started playing around with little particles and little embers floating around. You can kind of see them drifting around. Just makes the space feel a little more alive, not like a, you know, still static animation set. Also, I used the little glowing ores from Don't Touch, and again, it's just like a little transparent, you know, ore thing I just plop around. I can throw these all over the world and just keep duplicating this, putting it all over. Just little minor touch-ups to make the dark spaces feel like an actual cave of ores. It's kind of valuable. And then for the cube, this was something I had, you know, when I first thought of Animation Life, this was one of the ideas I had right from the beginning. Was in the end, he's gonna, you know, come across this mysterious cube. This is gonna be Herobrine's lair or whatever. You can actually see, you can see Herobrine in there right now. But the idea for the cube was, you know, this room is very warm and hot, and there's like, you know, little embers floating around and these lava fissures. But then the cube, I wanted to feel very cool. So everything has this like orange, you know, tone, but the cube has, you know, the opposite color, the light kind of blue, which is kind of cool and white. It's even glowing. And I wanted it to also look cold. So if we look into this material, let's split it up real quick. We can see nothing, because it's, there it is. There's the material, very complex material shader on this cube. I don't know if I even feel like going through the whole thing, but there it is. Let me try to zoom in on some of this. Oh, we got layers on layers. I think this was a vertical layer. Well, basically what I did, I had this ice texture, this ice kind of frosty texture, and I mapped the frosty texture to fall off vertically, so it's only kind of along the bottom edge, because if I put it over the whole cube, it became really difficult to look in the reflection, and I had a lot of shots that relied on using reflection, so the frostiness was only kind of along the bottom half. That way I could use the top half for reflection, showing the characters. Also, I had a noise texture, which I played around with and did something or other. And then I had some other image texture, which Oh, I don't even know. This was one of those things I played with for... I spent a whole day probably on this cube trying to get the materials right. I went through a lot of different experimenting around to getting the cube just right, getting reflectivity right, getting the kind of frost applied in an interesting and realistic way. I tried to make it look kind of photorealistic, but I also wanted to make it feel very just kind of monolithic. Like, you know, the idea behind this is it's like the Blender default cube. It's just this default cube in a room full of interesting, you know, fire and embers and stuff. There's just this, you know, reflective cube in the middle. And, you know, as he approaches it, I got some cool shots that were actually like from the reflection point of view of him approaching it. He comes up to it, you know, all the animators are kind of waiting around, and the animators are kind of getting worried, seeing what's going to happen. Cool shots of him looking at it. And, you know, he sees his own reflection, and oh no, you know, the other camera's back, so no Herobrine's here, the virus comes back. And then here, we have an interesting movement of characters. I'm trying to remember exactly how this worked. Yeah, we have Steve here, looking in the reflection. And then right here, he closes his eyes and blinks. How did this even happen? And yeah, there we go. As he blinks, something happened. I think it just hit his pupils and rotated. I don't know what happened there. Well, regardless, he blinks and I changed his eyes to a reflection of, you know, the glowing eyes. And right here, I actually hid him entirely and just had these, it was weird. I played around with the materials as far as, some of these things are only visible in reflection, and some of the material is only visible to the eye. I click on the skin, just look at it real quick. There it is, yeah. The skin is only visible to everything but the camera can't see the skin, but reflections can, whereas the eyes, it was, you know, the opposite. That way we get this shot where it's like, you know, we see him normally over here, but then Herobrine in the reflection. It was a little weird. The idea was, you know, that was Herobrine kind of appearing. It started as Steve's reflection, then it became Herobrine, and then he reaches forward. And see, this is actually, you know, him reaching forward as a reflection, hits it, and then you can start seeing the other ones in there. Actually, he's in like the same pose, so it looks like a reflection even though it's not. He was just kind of staying there at that pose the whole time. And the cube shatters. And this was really fun for me. I love doing like effects and dynamics and destruction and stuff. So there's actually two cubes. There's this cube, which is on the outside, just a normal old cube. And then there's, right when he touches the glass, it disappears. And a duplicate of the cube that I fractured appears. Well, it doesn't appear, it was just hidden. It's like, it's in there the whole time, it's just kind of hidden. But then the other one disappears, just slightly, you see it's slightly bigger than it. Disappears, then the shattered one appears. And I used the fracture add-on for Blender. It's actually packaged with Blender, you just have to enable it in your settings. But it allows you to kind of fracture things into little, you know, pieces. And you can even draw on the thing itself. You can kind of draw like where you want the fracture to occur. So as you can see, I drew all these little lines right there, and like a little circle, so you can see that's where like the you know, the main little bit happens, because I really wanted to make it look like his hand broke it. So you get like little small pieces here where his hand touched and it's shattered apart, and the rest just kind of crumbles apart in these, you know, bigger pieces to the back. And we have, you know, the very reflective outside. I have a separate material for the inside of the mirror that's kind of this glowing bright blue, you know, like you disrupted this magical power kind of thing. Camera shakes, he flies back from it, from the shockwave, all these little debris. I have another little collider on the floor, so all the debris, like, you know, falls across the floor and shatters. And you know, these are the kind of things that just make me love my job. I love doing these kind of things. I could do this all day. Steve gets back up, and then here's probably one of my favorites. Yeah, this might be my favorite shot. We get Herobrine pulling his sword out, walking all epically, nice kind of Dutch camera angle. He walks into the spotlight, so he kind of reveals himself. I even gave him a little bit more of a kind of custom walk, so he seems a little more intense and firm. He's not kind of so bubbly with his walking. And I was trying to make this fight scene a very fast pace, there's these shots all, cut around within every 8 to 10 frames. Kicks, a very quick shot of him sliding. I even had little particles being kicked up as if, to really sell the fact that he just got, kicked back and is digging his feet into the concrete to stop himself. These little rocks kind of crumbling up. And then here again, here's what I'm talking about, Herobrine's manipulating the environment. I just didn't want to show the arrows anymore. Now we're kind of getting into more a cinematic point of view from Steve. He just kind of sees these things. And at this point, I was having fun with the fracture add-on, the one I just did in the glass. I kind of got the hang of it. So I have this one hits him. I don't know if you even noticed, but it also shatters, crumbles apart on him. Because I was having so much fun with it, why not just keep shattering things? It's very, you can only see it shatter for about 5 frames, but it just made that nice effect of boom, it hit him so hard it broke apart. Then he stabs his sword in the ground. Another cool effect, I have the, modeled this little, very thin strip about as wide as a sword that kind of follows the path his sword takes, even including the little, kind of curves, goes back. And I made it a little bit thicker at the beginning where he stabs it down. And that has a gradient texture that maps across it, animates across it, that way it kind of glows. He's slowing himself down, it creates this kind of scrape. I also have particles being kicked up. So I really wanted to sell that kind of intense feel of him stabbing the sword in the ground, slowing himself down. Everything in this whole fight is just very intense and impactful. Then right as he looks up, Steve, hits him, the shards fly back from the shockwave, even the ground kicks up again. Another little effect I kind of learned with Mystery Warfare. So it's such an intense fight that every impact is groundbreaking and glass shattering, literally. And the more really quick fighting, quick shots. I'm not really good at my fighting, so I just do it really fast. So now we're getting near the end of the fight. That was pretty much the main thing. I want to have a little fight between them, make it feel intense. Herobrine comes down, and I always had this kind of joke idea from the beginning was, okay, well, how's he going to defeat Herobrine? He's not actually a better fighter, even with all the training. And the idea was, it wasn't really clear, but the idea was, okay, he can't defeat Herobrine, but he realizes Herobrine is an actual virus. Where Herobrine shows up, the software and the computer has a problem. So he realizes the only way to really defeat Herobrine is to shut down the program from the inside. And the only way he can do that is he overloads the program by using Derp's fish emitter that he got earlier during his adventures. So he starts spawning in a bunch of fish. And if you ever have too many particles in the scene, your computer will start going really slow and you'll run out of memory. So that's kind of the idea, is, he's throwing them, and at first Herobrine's like, huh? But then as he keeps going, starts getting more and more fish. There's also a little collider around him. This is just a little collider so the fish don't just go right through him. If they actually hit him, they'll kind of bounce off. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah, you can see that fish. See how some of the fish hit it and bounce backwards because they hit the collider. Yeah, so he's still spawning him. And he starts running, and you can really see he's pushing him back. And also, right here, I even turned off gravity. So it's as the computer's running out of memory, it's also, having a lot of errors in the computation. You see the fish just kind of floating everywhere now. It's just, overloading the fish. The memory's running low. He jumps. He's about to hit him. And, I did this cool effect in Vegas. Actually, look at this. Let's go back into Vegas real quick and look at that. I wanted to make it really feel like, right before you get a blue screen of death, you'll hear the audio freeze and loop and get all weird. I've had my share of blue screens of death. So I tried to create the same effect with the actual editing. I cut forward and I kind of cut back, and then I'll loop a thing a bunch of times and cut out the audio, then just loop the audio and just goes crazy, then blue screen of death. And then it's kind of that was kind of the end of the 3 acts. That was the beginning, the middle, and end. However, there wasn't really a conclusion, so there's kind of one final scene is him waking back up inside the computer as it turns back on, which again, this is one of the main things I had from the beginning. I knew there's gonna be this kind of scene where he's in the computer itself, and I had a lot of different art ideas for that. So let me actually open up the scene real quick and we'll look at what we ended up doing. So here is the scene. It's supposed to be this big, there's all these different softwares and programs, and they all have these little connections to file folders. They have files in them, and the file folders have little connections to little invisible files that you can't see that are all connecting to it. And the idea for this kind of came from the visualization of matrices. This was something I learned in one of my classes about how matrices can be represented as all these kind of connections between, you know, I don't remember anymore, but we saw all these kind of interesting graphs and stuff like this back when I took the class. I remember thinking like, whoa, that's a really kind of artistic way of visualizing all these, you know, connections, and there's all kinds of, there's a bunch of them. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of do a similar thing where it's like we have all these different little nodes, and each little node connects to all the other nodes, and it creates this huge, just kind of, you know, network galaxy looking thing. Here's a really good one. And, you know, the more used things kind of connect to the other big things, and they have little smaller things connecting off of them. So that was the idea I went for. You know, there's like the central node, the Windows operating system, then there's like the, you know, the software, and each software is connected. I wanted to have all the software connected to each other. In fact, if I turn this layer on, you can see where I experimented with that initially. However, it looked really weird from a horizontal point. It looked cool from above, like cool, it's a network. But when they were down in it, you would end up seeing all these just weird lines, and it looked kind of gross. So I took that out. So it turns more into just this big kind of space. You know, it's almost like they're in space. It's like a galaxy. I even kind of made it like a galaxy. I made it kind of more flat, and kind of spirally. So it's like, you know, there's less dense around the edge and it's more dense on the inside. And there's actually kind of two layers with a little bit of space in between. That way I can kind of move Steve through the middle a little more easily. Anyway, he wakes up and the computer then powers back on, gets really bright, you know, all the software turns back on. And he's drifting along, a lot of cool wide shots with him as a silhouette over the operating system. So he goes over and finds Blender, which is of course the software we use. So here's Blender, he goes over to Blender, and the idea was he's like, oh, let me go back to Blender. But when he touches it, it's shielded, and you know, come on, touch it, and boosh, shields it, and you know, he gets thrown back, and this you know, connection from the operating system turns on. And the idea was, of course, it thinks he's a virus because, you know, he's not connected to anything, he's out there trying to mess with the programs, so the operating system defends it. So he decides the only way to go back into Blender is to, you know, break the connection, power down Blender, and then he's going to have to reconnect it using himself. And you might be wondering, you know, how does he know all this? And the way I kind of figured was, you know, Steve he's not a normal person like you or I. He's not really physically based. He's technically a software, he's a program. So I feel like he has a little more knowledge on this. It kind of makes more sense to him. He kind of thinks like like a program would think. So then he goes, and also a lot of this was, you know, just a visualization of what's going on. There's not actually like this physical space like this. Anyway, he jumps back off towards the operating system. And if you're wondering how I did all these weird little like 3D things, they're not actually entirely 3D. It's actually like a half sphere that always just turns to face the camera, similar to like how I used to do like the player names. If you look around the scene, if we go grab, like, let's get a good view of here's Steam and some of my Steam games. I try to put things kind of logically together, like, so here's Steam, and then here's like my Steam games. As you can see, they all just kind of rotate to face the camera, so they look like 3D things, but they're not. Also, there is an Easter egg right here when he's flying along. There's something not quite right about this program, but I doubt anyone actually saw that because it was very small and subtle. This was one of those scenes where the music really carried it. I had this song, and right when I heard the song, I was like, yeah, this is gonna be the scene. This is gonna be the song that plays for the final scene inside the computer. So here's the operating system, and I had this cool, like, kind of webbing of energy that kind of slowly was pulsing up through it, just to make it feel interesting, and that was just I put a little bit of a displacement on it, so it kind of pokes it through, just enough where it kind of pokes only part of it through. And then, of course, that animates it upwards. He reaches in. There's actually this cool effect you can't really see because it doesn't update in the viewport, but there's this cool, like, wavy effect. The same effect when he hits the blender. I actually just copied it from when he touches Blender a moment ago, and it shields himself. It's kind of this ripple effect. So the idea was he pulls out this cable to make a connection again. And initially, all the programs were going to be connected to the operating system, because that's kind of how it works. However, when I did it, it was taking way too long to set up, and it was slowing the program down too much. So I had to only, just make this one connection. So it makes a jump, and he connects, and everything turns back on. So now we're basically at the end of the animation. More office scenes, nothing's really different here, it's just kind of different time of day. I made it a little more gloomy. The sky outside is kind of gray, it's dark inside. There's actually leftover aftermath from the party. There's pizzas everywhere. There's even a pizza under the couch, like someone left it down there. But then he sees that there's like an autosave, and the idea was, if you remember at the beginning when Herobrine first showed up, well actually it was Null. When Null first showed up, myself, RB, tried to save the program, but it wasn't working. It was all grayed out. He couldn't save the program. He couldn't quit. So the idea was, oh no, he couldn't save, so he wasn't able to save it. However, it had auto-saved just before that. But then the only way he can get the autosave was when, Steve went into the computer and rehooked everything back up, and he was supposed to have, loaded himself back up into that autosave. So then RB clicks the autosave, and it's back to like that kind of beginning scene how it was initially, and we see the wolf is alive again, hops up and barks, and that's the end. So I wanted to have that kind of happy ending, even though it was kind of, sad at the beginning. The wolf lived in the end, they went on an adventure, and then for the credits, I actually got a little bit lazy here to get near the end. I didn't feel like rendering out like full scenes, because a lot of people don't really care about the credits enough to even watch them. I didn't feel like it would be worth, days of rendering just for credits that most people are going to watch through in like 10 seconds, or skip entirely. I didn't want to have just solid blackness, because it seems a little plain, then people would definitely skip them. So I actually was using the Pro Lighting skies, because there's so many pretty skies on there. I figured why not just, pan across these skies and put the text on that. It looks a lot prettier. So that's what I did. And if you were a very loyal fan and stuck to the very end, you'll notice there was one little hidden ending, which was probably my favorite little hidden ending of all them. Cuts back, because if he if he auto-saved and went back in time, now Null's back. So then Null visits the cube room instead of Steve. He goes there and just tries to find out what's going on. Is Herobrine here? He senses something, and then at the end he turns around because he hears something, but we don't see exactly what. But then if we look in the reflection behind him, we see both Herobrine and Entity 303 standing beside him, which is kind of foreshadowing stuff in case I do another one of these, if it's received well enough. Also, it was cool because this connected back to the end of Mystery Warfare. This post-credits scene right here was supposed to happen shortly after Mystery Warfare's post-credits scene. All of these are kind of connected. At the end of Mystery Warfare, Entity 303 was imprisoned after, trying to sabotage the Hypixel lobby, but then Herobrine showed up and broke him out of jail. So next, after breaking Entity out of jail, Herobrine has now come back to the cube to recruit Null. So we're starting to kind of recruit these villains. They're starting to work together. You may start seeing these post-credits start making little connections between our future animations, leading up to something bigger. So keep your eye out. And thanks everyone for listening to my behind the scenes and commentary. I think I got most of everything. Don't think there were too many other Easter eggs. I explained most of them. There's a lot, there's little minor things here and there. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the animation. If you did, be sure to, share it with your friends and stuff, tell them about it. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you're interested in more behind the scenes or tutorial stuff. Have some tutorials in the making, for this channel, little quick tips and stuff. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to read them, and I'll see you next video.